Today, on Blue Steel Heroes, we salute one of the most intense, dangerous, and little heralded communities of warriors. The small team, deep penetration patrols of the U.S. Army in Vietnam, which were known as LRRPs, Long Range Reconnaissance Patrols, often pronounced LERPs, and how they evolved into the 75th Infantry Ranger Group. Their mission was simple in concept, but it was brutal in execution. Go far behind enemy lines, observe the enemy, gather intelligence, avoid detection, call in fire on the enemy, and when necessary, strike hard. Many of the young men in these patrols were barely out of high school. Early on, they had little experience in combat before they were sent with a few comrades behind enemy lines, often into countries where we were not officially present. Many of these young men paid a steep price. Their legacy carries on today. Let's walk through their history. In the mid-1960s, as the war in Vietnam intensified, and the enemy, the People's Army of Vietnam, and the Viet Cong, moved along trails into base areas and jungle sanctuaries, U.S. field commanders realized they needed more than large-scale search and destroy operations. But before they could mount any operations, they needed information. So they took volunteers for small, almost always 5 to 8 men, small teams that could go deep into enemy territory, could stay hidden, could watch enemy movement, and call in artillery or air support. These units first became known as LRP, Long Range Patrols, and then as LRRP, Long Range Reconnaissance Patrols. These teams were inserted by helicopter deep in hostile territory, often without any immediate backup. Their mission: observe, report, ambush if the opportunity arose, direct fire strikes, assess damage, sometimes capture prisoners or neutralize cadre, sometimes tap enemy communications. Early on, these LRRP teams were attached to divisions or brigades in Vietnam. They often worked with minimal support, relied on stealth, on their tracking skills, on jungle craft. One writer described them as this: the Lurps got assigned just about every type of mission you can imagine. We were the people who went into enemy territory and did whatever had to be done there. Many were volunteers. Many were young, just out of basic training or airborne, thrown into a brutal environment. Many did not come back. In February of 1969, the Department of the Army reorganized all of the U.S. Army's LRRP and LRP units in Vietnam and in Europe under the common parent regiment, the 75th Infantry Ranger. The idea was to give a lineage, an esprit de corps, a structure to what had been a very ad hoc, specialized reconnaissance company. In 1974, the 1st and 2nd Battalions Ranger of the 75th Infantry were activated in the U.S., and the modern 75th Ranger Regiment was formed in 1986. Initially, the mission of the LERP teams was focused on intelligence collection. Where is the enemy moving? In what concentrations? Where are their supply trails? For example, one company, Company L of the 75th Infantry, in 1969 conducted 310 long-range patrols, accounting for 21 enemy killed, encountered enemy visually 100 times. The loss of company personnel due to enemy action during this period was 5 killed and 14 wounded. But in time, the missions evolved. More direct action, more intentional ambushes, sometimes intentionally engaging the enemy in firefights. The eyes behind the lines motto captured the core: penetrate, observe, call in fire attacks, and exfiltrate, often under extreme risk. One writer summed it up: we lived for the mission. There's basically only one rule: do whatever you had to do to survive. These teenagers had among the most dangerous jobs in Vietnam. The overall casualty rate for the LRRPs is hard to estimate, but it is thought to be around 45%. It's early morning, pre-dawn. The mist is hanging over the jungle near the Ho Chi Minh Trail network in A Corps, a 5-man team from the Ranger Company. They insert by Huey, UH-1 helicopter into a dusty landing zone some 8 kilometers behind enemy lines. The team leader is 19 years old, just barely out of high school. He's airborne qualified, and he volunteered for Ranger, or LRP, because he wants to be in the action. His radio operator is an old man at 20. The other 3 men aged 18 through 21. They carry rucksacks loaded with rations, water, a compass, topological map, captured document or 2, claymore mines, suppression weapons, a PRC-25 radio, and their M16s. Their mission? Locate a suspected PAVN regimental headquarters area, observe, and report on night movements. Set up an ambush later, call for gunships and artillery. They move out silently under the cover of darkness. They follow a narrow elephant trail through the thick vegetation. At midday, they reach a ridge overlooking a drainage that the team leader suspects is being used by the enemy for resupply. They see fresh footprints, signs of sappers, some spent shells. The team halts, sets up a concealed observation post, positions and arms mines, taps a buried communication line with captured NVA material. They settle in, never talking above the lightest whisper, and that hardly at all. As night falls, they hear muffled voices, see torchlights winding through the valley floor. They call in a helicopter gunship strike. After rockets and miniguns engage the enemy, they survey the bomb damage, spot enemy casualties, pick up intelligence about the enemy's intent, all without being seen. But the extraction itself is postponed due to weather. They endure monsoon rain, leeches, malaria mosquitoes, and the constant tension of being behind lines and isolated. On day 5, they're compromised. A local villager, perhaps coerced, or perhaps simply unaware, gives their position away. 2 North Vietnamese Army soldiers spot their footprints. Contact is immediate. The team constructs hasty positions. Low cloud cover and close-by mountains make overhead gunships ineffective as the enemy launches a probing attack. The team fights a short, intense firefight in which one of the team members is wounded. The team leader radios base and calls in artillery and a fast rope insertion of reinforcements. Under the covering fire, they break contact, move to the exfil landing zone. Finally, the evacuation helicopter arrives, sling loads the wounded man, and loads up the rest. Back at camp, they debrief, have a small celebration, and then the next patrol is being prepped while the leader writes a short patrol report. This is the rhythm. Jump deep, collect, engage if needed, exfil, rest briefly, go again. For many of these young men, this would happen several times a month for months on end. The adrenaline, the loneliness, the danger, the feeling of being outside the mainstream of the war, most groups even in Vietnam did not know they existed, and in the most dangerous zone behind enemy lines, left marks on them. Exact casualty figures are hard to pin down, but we have some examples. In all, approximately 1,000 men served in Company E, LRP, H Company, 75th Infantry Ranger, of the 1st Cavalry. More than half were wounded, but only 35 were killed in action. The unit became the most decorated and the longest serving unit in LERP Ranger history. This gives a casualty, killed and wounded rate of perhaps 45% for that one unit. Yet, these teenagers served and fought, and sometimes died, out where no one saw what was happening to them. These young men, many barely 18 to 21, entered one of the most intense combat environments imaginable. For many, the return home, however, was harder to navigate. Oral histories show a pattern: difficulty reintegrating, insomnia or hypervigilance, nightmares, struggles with PTSD, difficulty explaining to civilian friends and family what it meant to walk in silence behind enemy lines. One veteran of the 173rd Airborne LRRP recounted how after returning home he found himself twice as fast, half as comfortable in crowds as he had been, that he slept with his gun as though he were still in the jungle. The quiet nature of the mission, often small team, out of contact, minimal recognition by anyone, meant that many of the members felt completely isolated from the war effort. The war's political environment added to it. Soldiers returning from Vietnam did not always receive the welcome that previous generations had. The small team size also made it more difficult to meet up later with a combat brother because there were so few of them. Many veterans from these units struggled with substance abuse, from disconnected relationships, and in later years, issues with physical illnesses, jungle exposures, tropical diseases, and mental health. The 2014 study referenced above noted that decades after Vietnam, some 200,000 veterans still suffered from war-related PTSD. The rate among LRRP's 75th Ranger units was higher per capita than usual. On a positive note, the reorganization into the Rangers enabled many LRRP veterans to form strong bonds. They remain Rangers for life in spirit. The Association of the 75th Ranger Regiment honors them. Veteran organizations emphasize, never forget our fallen and their Gold Star families. The small team, deep recon, direct action model of the LRRP units in Vietnam fed directly into U.S. Army doctrine for special operations, for reconnaissance, and for small unit infiltration and exfiltration. The Ranger companies under the 75th Infantry inherited the history, the tactics, and the fierce spirit of the LRRPs. After Vietnam, those companies were inactivated, but in 1974, Ranger battalions were stood up again in the United States, and in 1986, the 75th Ranger Regiment was formally designated, inheriting the lineage and the honors of the Rangers. In the broader sense, the notion of eyes behind the lines still lives in the modern U.S. Army long-range surveillance units. Special reconnaissance detachments and the larger Ranger Regiment hold their history. So the mission that began in Vietnam with small teams quietly observing, patrolling far forward, evolved into an institutionalized Ranger identity with specialized training, equipment, doctrine, a direct ancestor of today's Army Rangers. In closing, I want to highlight this. The LRRP teams didn't wear big unit patches. They barely wore uniforms at all. They rarely got the limelight, but their work changed the shape of warfare. These teams of teenagers who tracked the human motion of the enemy through endless jungle darkness, who bore the weight of a rucksack heavier than most civilians could carry, whose eyes and ears were the thin line between the U.S. forces and the enemy's hidden world, they deserve our respect. And when those small teams were reorganized into the 75th Infantry, the legacy of that recon warrior ethos carried on. Many of those veterans returned home and carried scars that the casual observer could not see. It is our duty to remember, to honor, and to learn from them. If you are a veteran of a LRRP or Ranger company from Vietnam, please drop a note in the comments or send us a contact. We'd love to spotlight your story. Until next time, respect the cost, honor the service, and remember the heroes behind the lines. Please share, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We have other unit presentations available soon. Thank you.